Yeah, that was a very skewed documentary, to say the least.
When I'm watching it, I'm like, what is this? First of all, they have their cake and eat it, too, because when the plane hits the World Trade Center, all of a sudden the wings are strong enough to sever all these columns in the core of the World Trade Center, not just the outside. Of course, it severed some of the outside. It went through the building, but it severs all these things in the core. But meanwhile, at the Pentagon, almost the same exact scenario, the plane comes in, and instead the columns sever the wings, and all of a sudden the plane is supposed to turn into some lava-like substance, according to the guy from Purdue. We're talking to Aidan Monaghan. 911blogger.com, it's 911blogger.com is the website. It's Jason Bermas, the Infowarrior.com. Go check it out. We'll be back after this. All right, folks, we are back. It's the Infowarrior with Jason Bermas. We are joined by Aidan Monaghan of 911blogger.com. How many of these FOIA requests do you think you've put out there? And compare that to how many responses you've gotten, because I know there are some you put out there where no one responds at all, right?
Yeah. Oh, there have been dozens. Sometimes I surprise myself even by going to the mailbox and receiving answers to requests that I had forgotten I'd even submitted. I have a whole pile full of just different information and context and what have you. Referring back to what I was speaking of earlier, I just was hoping to basically summarize quickly the interesting ties between Turner Construction and the World Trade Center events themselves. Turner Construction have heavy experience in demolition. They had been working at the World Trade Center site from as early as 1997 all the way through the very morning of 9/11. Mm-hmm. And they also had a very close relationship with one of the only two organizations within the federal government that were manufacturing and developing nanothermite and their components, that being the Naval Surface Warfare Center. I asked the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for a bibliography of all the work that they were doing at the World Trade Center during their time there. And they interestingly claimed that those records were all destroyed on 9/11.
Very interesting indeed. And then you look, what really shocks me about 9/11 and the World Trade Center complex is if you look at the CIA bases that were put there. All right, you had the largest CIA base outside of Langley, Virginia, in World Trade Center 7. You had other undisclosed CIA offices in the Twin Towers themselves. You had the Department of Defense. You had the SEC. You had the IRS. You had the Office of Emergency Management. I mean, this was a major spook house, and that's just what we know today. In fact, one of the pieces that I show in Fabled Enemies is how it was cordoned off by intelligence, and they had to search, all the debris and whatnot for basically information they didn't want to go public, some of the actual hard copies of records that were still classified. And then you find out about these shadowy organizations and companies, much like the ones you're talking about, and we know that the CIA has front groups all the time. You have to wonder what level of intelligence was in these buildings. And even coinciding with, say, John Schroeder's story, the fireman, he talks about, and it's very overlooked in my opinion, we talk about it in Loose Change Final Cut briefly, he talks about how on his way up the towers, he went into a closet and there was already a dead body in the closet that hadn't been burned or anything like that. So obviously they were getting rid of people inside the building as this occurred. I mean, the level of cartel-like behavior and evidence from that day is astounding to me. And most people just want to suck their thumbs and not even entertain the idea that it could be anything outside of what the mainstream media has told us about that day. What are your feelings on that? Do you ever think we're going to break ground to the point where we do get a new investigation?
I think once an investigation does happen, I think some dots will become connected very quickly. Also referring to Turner Construction, the CEO at the time is also someone who has enjoyed a close relationship with former President Bush. He was appointed by former President Bush to the Commission of White House Fellows, which is basically an organization that grooms heavy hitters for prominent roles in the public and private sectors. This person is now the mayor of Dallas, Texas, has enjoyed also a working relationship with former Commerce Department Secretary Carlos Gutierrez, who oversaw, of course, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. I'm losing my train of thought here. I had so much in my mind, and I'm forgetting it now. There's so much to cover. Oh, by the way, as far as access to the towers go, before 9/11, James Gorley, a researcher and one of the co-authors of the nanothermite paper that we've all come to know of, able to pry some records from NIST, and one of those was a property assessment report that was dated December 2006. Within that report, it was put together by Merritt and Harris, a property assessment organization. It was within that report. It was various work was described as in need of attention, and work that was required to have attention within 1 year of the December 6, 2008 was rust treatment and asbestos, or refireproofing and asbestos abatement of the steel columns within the elevator shafts of beach towers.
Let's talk about that on the other side. It's the Infowarrior with Jason Bermas, prisonplanet.tv, Infowars.com.